In this video I'll be turning my first bowl. Unfortunately it all goes horribly wrong later in the project, so it's a bit of a fail video, but this one was about gaining more experience with the lathe as I'm new to wood turning and I learned a lot, so let's get into it. I pulled out a piece of what I think might be mahogany salvaged from an old church refurbishment. I chose this piece because it was nice and thick, a bit like me. I cut away the piece I wanted to use, roughly a square workpiece, and then found the centre using my centre finder. I can use the 90-degree side offered up to each of the corners, scribe a line, and then it's easy to see where the centre point is. I used that centre point to draw a circle using my compass as big as I could get out of the workpiece, and then I can cut away some of the waste material at the bandsaw to give me less to turn away at the lathe. I centre it onto the spur centre and then set the tailstock. Then I can get the tool rest as close as I can without it hitting the workpiece. This is my collection of turning tools so far. Most of these were picked up on eBay, but I want to say a massive thank you to Peter Gawler, who kindly offered to send me some of his old turning tools: a skew chisel, a parting tool, a spindle gouge, and a couple of scrapers too. Thank you so much, Peter. First I reached for a roughing gouge. I got this one secondhand on eBay, and I'm going to put a clean grind on it before I start using it to make sure it's nice and sharp. I'm using my new grinder setup, which I covered in a recent video. I'll link to that in the description box below if you're interested. I popped my respirator on and also this face shield, which was recommended to me by someone in the comment section of a previous video. I'll link to this in the description box below too. And I really like it, especially because it makes me look like some kind of cyborg ninja. So this is my first time using chisels rather than carbide scrapers. I start by riding the bevel, as they say, and then I can lift the handle of the tool until it starts to cut. And I use this to get the workpiece round. Resting the shaft of the chisel on top can help determine how round it is without having to stop the lathe, and it's not quite there yet. That looked pretty good to me, so next I reached for the bowl gouge. I bought this one new online and I've been excited to use it for the first time. I'm starting to shape the outside of the bowl here, working on the corner. And I start with the chisel held in a closed position, which means it's held to the workpiece like this, and then I can slowly open it up by twisting it, exposing this bevel here, which is the area that will be doing the cutting. I learned all of this from a tutorial on the WorthEffort YouTube channel, which I'll link to in the description box below. And as I gain confidence, I can gradually open up the chisel a bit more and take slightly bigger cuts. I'm working on the sides here and I want to have a bit of a lip at the top of the bowl. It looked pretty good, but it was a little rough, so I went to the grinder, set the table at 45 degrees and put a sharp edge on the gouge. And then I position the tool rest, crank up the speed of the lathe, and I can try doing some long passes from top to bottom to smooth everything over. Then I turned the speed of the lathe down and moved to sanding, starting with 100 grit, then 240, and I'm trying to keep it moving to prevent sanding streaks. That looked okay, so I applied some shellac to seal it. And once that was dry, I started sanding with 240 grit to denib. And then I added another couple of coats of shellac. I decided to apply some bry wax too with some 4/0 steel wool to get it nice and smooth. and then I can buff out the wax to get it nice and shiny. I'll be using my faceplate to turn the inside of the bowl, and I'll mount it onto a scrap piece of chipboard. What I should have done here is turned a tenon onto the bottom of the bowl, and then I could turn a mortise into the chipboard, which would have been the best way to centre it. But I didn't do that, so instead I'm just going to use the dividers and make some marks with a pen to help me to get it positioned as centered as possible. My first attempt didn't look good at all. You can see here it's spinning around all over the place, so I took it off and tried again. And that looked much better. Not perfect, but good enough, I think. But in future, I'll definitely do the mortise and tenon technique. So I could start hollowing out the inside of the bowl, and this was probably the most enjoyable part for me. It was all great fun, to be honest, but this part was particularly fun. I did get my first catch here, not a bad one, but unfortunately I didn't get it on camera. So I just got my first catch when I was trying to slim out the walls of this bowl. And I think what I was doing wrong was I had my chisel too open, so I was kind of holding it like this, and I think I should have been holding it like this, because after that I was able to take more cuts with no issues. That catch did leave a bit of torn out grain on the inside, but no big deal. I needed to turn more material away anyway, so it soon disappeared. I kept checking the wall thickness just by feel. It's pretty easy to tell just using your fingers where more material needs to be removed. I wasn't going for super slim walls. I was aiming for maybe 8mm or so, with a thicker lip at the top, and leaving a bit of extra material at the base too, because I knew I'd need to do some sanding there later. I kept working on it, and once I was happy, I moved on to sanding and finishing in the same way as I did the outside of the bowl. Then I can remove it using a chisel and get rid of the hot glue. And then I sanded the base of the bowl, and this is where things started to go wrong. Something awful just happened. I turned off the camera, and then I thought, oh, I'll just do a bit more sanding to the bottom because I wanted to get rid of that little dimple there. Obviously didn't have a tight enough grip on the bowl as I presented it to the belt, and it caught at the bottom there and it flung it into the air, and now it has a few scuffs and scars and scratches, as you can see, which is a real shame because it was looking great up until that point. Actually, I'm just thinking maybe I can mount this onto the faceplate again with hot glue and turn it again and maybe finish it again. It seems a shame to waste it, so yeah, I might give that a try. Do you ever have one of those days where you just think, everything's going well today, this is brilliant, and then suddenly something will send you crashing back down to earth? Here I'm marking up the diameter of the top of the bowl and making some marks to help me position it again, and I used hot glue to mount it. And I can use the live center here just to make sure it stays put while I remove more material from the outside of the bowl to remove all of that damage. I kept removing material until the walls were maybe 6mm thick or so, but when I stopped the lathe I could tell that something wasn't quite right. There were clear signs that this wasn't centered properly. I carried on regardless though. I figured maybe I could get away with the walls being slightly uneven in thickness, not knowing how bad the problem was without being able to see the inside of the bowl. While I had access to the bottom, I thought I'd also add a little rim there too, and I'm using my circular scraper to do that. Then I move on to sanding and finishing again. And then I removed the bowl again and cleaned up that top lip on the sander, this time holding it more firmly, of course. As you can see, the walls of this bowl are pretty badly uneven. You can see it's thinner on this side and thicker on this side. So as a project, this one is a complete fail, unfortunately. But I decided to have another go using the same process as before, but instead turning a tenon to fit the base of the bowl and a mortise into the block that was fitted to the faceplate. And that one worked out much better. As you can see here, the walls are a consistent thickness all of the way around. I didn't film making that one though. I was just keen to get onto it without messing around with setting up the camera, to be honest. This second one came out pretty nice, although actually I prefer the shape of the first bowl, the one that I messed up. But anyway, this project was all about learning by doing, which is my favourite way to learn. And I learned loads. I learned how to use the bowl gouge, and I only got one small catch during the entire project, which I'm well happy with, although it was a shame not to get it on camera. All credit for that goes to the YouTube videos I studied from WorthEffort Woodworking and Mike Waldt, which I'll link to down below if you're interested. I learned that using tools such as the roughing gouge and bowl gouge are far more enjoyable to use than carbide tools, which is what I used on my first turning project when I made a mallet. I got more catches with those carbide tools, and I also found them, I'm not sure what the word is, less intuitive to use. There's something about turning with chisels that just feels a bit more natural to me personally. Maybe that's just because I'm already familiar with wood grain and how to work with it, possibly. I do hear a lot of people saying that carbide tools are easier to learn, and that's probably true for some, but for me personally, that's definitely not the case. I'm not even sure I'll reach for my carbide tools again, to be honest, now that I have a set of chisels that I can use. I learned that even though something might look like it's centered well enough onto a faceplate by eye, that doesn't mean it's centered accurately enough for it to produce good results and consistent wall thickness in the case of this particular project. I learned that I definitely want to buy a chuck, because faffing around with faceplate mounting works fine, but I think the convenience of using a chuck will make it quicker and more enjoyable. But most of all, I learned that turning with chisels is just great fun. I absolutely loved every minute of it, so much so that I immediately started turning the second bowl straight after turning the first one. And I want to do more of it. In fact, I want to do it right now, so I'm going to say please subscribe to my channel for more weekly woodworking videos. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do that via PayPal or Patreon. And on Patreon you can get early access to my videos, exclusive content, free plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thanks for watching.